the perimeter wall, and then on the right you have another large building which is marked in green here. The length of the perimeter wall, as far as we could follow it, is 12.5 meters, which is pretty large, pretty long, and it turns at an angle here towards the south and extends for another 9 meters. So this is again something that you would associate with official structures of some sort, and not just a normal domestic installation. This is a view of the excavation area to the north, and again you can see marked here, because it's easier to see like that. You can see the building with the thick sloping walls marked in blue, the perimeter wall, and we actually have part of this perimeter wall going northwards as well, but it's still covered by some later settlement remains. And then you have another large building just here on the in green on the towards the south. Then this is a view to the west, and again you see is the similar thing, just to illustrate the sheer size of these structures, with this perimeter wall very much delimiting the space in this part. And part of it, shown here with the red line, is actually going under this huge complex, which are 3 enclosure walls that were built in this area at a later time, towards the end of the Old Kingdom in the 6th dynasty. And these enclosures deliberately avoid the 2 structures I've just shown you. So they must have still been in the landscape and marked as important structures when, in the 6th dynasty, these enclosure walls were built. So going back to our strange enigmatic building with the sloping sides and very thick walls, we actually found the entrance of this structure already in 2014, but we hadn't excavated around it. We just had one side of it. And this is the original situation when we discovered the entrance, which you can see here. I will show you close up in a moment. And here are some of these extremely thick walls, more than 2 meters wide. And a later, just in case you wonder what this round thing is, this is a later grain silo that was domestic in function and built into this. The entrance is very unusual, simply because it's pretty well preserved, and we actually have the top of a door that was left open. So you see the wooden lintel, it's sagged a bit with all the weight on top, and then you have the part of the wooden door still being in an open position. And it also tells us that most of this building is actually still underneath this particular level. So we have really the top of the building, and now our idea is we need to really get down and find the corresponding floor levels, and hopefully some finds that actually go with it. We did excavate, of course, just in the entrance area a little bit, and we had a lot of debris dating to the 5th dynasty, from bread molds, a pot stand, beer jar, the usual kind of ceramics you would associate with a settlement. Not the most attractive kind of pieces of pottery, I have to say, but they tell us a lot. And then we did a test trench just in front of the entrance, where we just wanted to see how deep does this building, how deep, where can we find the corresponding floor level. And it's about 1.50 meters deep. And underneath it, we have immediately, again, the natural sand and bedrock, and almost no installations that date prior to this installation. So, again, as I said, this is not something I would expect. It cannot be a domestic installation, but also confirmed non-domestic use is this small room. We are now a little bit further to the southeast of the site. This season we found a small room with a lot of storage jars that again hint towards an administrative building complex in the vicinity. And here's one of our workers excavating these large storage jars. And this picture is actually showing you might notice these strange little markers here. This is for a new method, a digital recording method we've been using for the first time this year. And these are specific markers that work like barcodes generated by a computer program that's called PhotoScan. And we were actually very lucky. We got a brief introduction into using this new software in September by Doug Inglis from Texas A&M University, who's been using this much more extensively. And in Egypt, this is not something people use a lot, but I will show you more in depth at the end of this talk how amazing it is to record archaeological remains in three dimensions. And this is basically showing you, it's actually pretty simple. You take a lot of pictures of a specific room or objects. In this case, this is the room with the storage jars, and the blue squares show you the camera position. So when I took the pictures there, just with a handheld normal camera, it took about 123 pictures in this case. And then it creates, through various processes, a mesh used with triangulation that starts to give you the three-dimensional aspect of all this. The program recognizes the pixels and basically puts it together, puts all the photos together and can create three-dimensional space and a three-dimensional surface. And then the end result is a 3D image of the actual room in color, which is, I mean, 10 times faster, even if the computer has its own processing time of several hours. Still more precise and a better way to record things than you imagine drawing by hand, where you will always be two-dimensional. And even using our total station, our equipment for mapping remains, we're never that fast, and we never get the three-dimensional aspect. But I will come back to this. Really amazing program. I'm a great fan now, and easy to use, not really difficult. The overall evolution of the occupation in this zone, just to sum up, we have first a large official administrative structure. I cannot exclude that we might even have an early phase of a sanctuary, but again, this needs to be confirmed in the future, in the next season, where we're getting to the levels that are actually connected to this, to these buildings. There was a destruction and abandonment that follows this particular phase of occupation, and then this is replaced by small domestic courtyards, very much domestic and very different, which are then later on replaced by domestic houses. So what this actually shows is a radical change in function of this settlement area. Here you can see one of the courtyards, which is being excavated by one of our graduate students, Emily Sarrazin. And you see immediately the aspect. It's not the same kind of quality of walls. It's not the same thickness. It's very different installations. And this comes after the abandonment of this building. Now I realize I forgot to tell you one important thing, and I need to go back a couple of slides. Hold on. If I go back to, just bear with me for a second. If I go back to this picture here, I should point out one thing is, in front of the entrance, here is where we have the thick building with the building with the thick walls. On the exterior of the building is in this area here, and we have a large open courtyard in this part. There are no structures, and we're hoping to reach the levels of this courtyard and maybe find some discarded objects that will tell us something about the function of this building, because most of the interior was actually situated to the west. And it did not really preserve because of the sebach digging, because of these people taking the fertilizer. So we can't really hope to excavate much of the interior, which makes it unfortunately really hard to see the function. But I'm hoping that on the outside there are some trash, discarded objects that will actually tell us something about the function. And then we do have, which you might have noticed as well when I was going through these pictures, there are large parts of the site that have been burned very heavily. That's why you get these red and black patches in the soil. So there's a huge destruction that follows at some point. And this is another hope we have, that in once we reach these destruction layers, which we couldn't really this year, again, we find some objects that were actually abandoned and tell us something more about the precise function. So let me go back to where I was. So in general, about the evolution of the settlement, we can now say that at the moment, the earliest remains we have are situated on the eastern side of the Tell, relatively close to the Ptolemaic Temple. And not surprisingly, the Ptolemaic temple, which is the last form of a temple that dates back to the 3rd millennium, is so much larger and probably took away some of the oldest settlement remains. And certainly I don't see any other part that we still have preserved where we could access anything earlier than what we have there. Then we see a major expansion of the site, quite interesting, during the very end of the Old Kingdom, the First Intermediate period, when we have, historically speaking, a time where Egypt falls apart, so the centralized government falls apart, and we have several power centers in Egypt, especially Upper Egypt. And usually this time period, not only is it not very well known because it's a pretty short time considering the whole of Pharaonic period history, but it's also usually associated with a major economic crisis. Now in Upper Egypt, and Edfu is only one example, it seems like at this specific time, the towns were expanding rapidly. And this can be very easily demonstrated here at Edfu, where we have a major set of enclosure walls dating to this period that were first constructed on the northern and western side of the Tell. And this season, as you can see, some of these are actually three wall phases here, massive enclosure walls, and the total thickness is 6 meters. We actually cleaned with our amazing team of Egyptian workers. We cleaned 70 meters of wall. There was a lot of cleaning to do on the top. There was a lot of debris that was still covering it. 70 meters in 1 week. So the guys were working extremely hard. We have one of the foremen in charge. He was like, I have 20 guys, but I make them work like 50. So he was all the time pushing everybody to, yeah, fantastic results. So now we can actually study the architecture, and we also used the same program, the photoscan program, taking, of course, more than 100 pictures of the wall in order to actually make a three-dimensional reconstruction, because you imagine drawing any of this by hand, impossible. It would be a nightmare. We also had a funny incident with this cherry picker, because at one moment we noticed there was this truck going up and down on the street repairing the street lights, and we thought, oh, maybe we can hire these guys for half an hour to take some pictures of this wall. And yeah, they were very happy. They thought it was too funny that we needed to use their cherry picker. And I didn't go up there. I have to say, I wasn't particularly trusting the security of this thing. But the picture, this is actually the picture taken here from the truck. But it worked out pretty well. Yeah, and a few seasons back, in order to even understand what this walling system was about, we found some of the settlement remains that were still sort of built against the first phase of walling, dating to the First Intermediate period. So we have a really good idea of what the chronology of all this is. And then in the Middle Kingdom, there was the last phase of wall fortification here. But what I really want to point out is that the maximum expansion at Tel Edfu of the settlement to the north and west happened during this particular time, so around 2100 BC, and it stayed exactly the same until the Greco-Roman period, Byzantine period. The whole site never expanded any further in these two directions, which I actually, and again, we need to do more research on this, I relate to the fact that you couldn't go outside this zone because the Nile flood would catch up with you. There was no way you could settle further into, this is actually a modern cemetery these days, and you can even see there the ground drops dramatically. So another little detail we found out about recently is when the Ptolemaic temple was part of a groundwater lowering project where they dug a trench around the temple in order to make sure that the groundwater is not affecting the stone of the temple.